$28 million. That is the price of an 8-year war for the soul of basketball. When Caitlin Clark put pen to paper on the most lucrative sponsorship deal in the history of the WNBA, it was not just a contract. It was a declaration of a hostile takeover. For decades, the Oregon-based titan of industry treated women's basketball as a side hustle, a charitable tax write-off, or at best, a niche market for the 3%ers. But then came the $28 million signature. By choosing the Swoosh over the $16 million lure of Under Armour and the personalized courtship of Stephen Curry. Caitlin Clark didn't just join a brand. She held it hostage. There are winners and there are losers in this new world order. Caitlin is the winner, the losers. Every legacy player who spent 10 years grinding in empty gyms, only to see a 22-year-old rookie walk into a signature shoe line that they were told was impossible to build. But there is a second loser, one that no one wants to talk about yet. Nike's original golden child. The one who was supposed to be the chosen one before the Midwest took over. I am talking about Paige Bueckers. Right now, there are vultures circling the Gainbridge Fieldhouse in Indiana. They are in the media scolding Caitlin for her turnovers. They are in the comment sections, calling her a flash in the pan. They are the jealous rivals on the court, delivering hard fouls that look more like personal vendettas than defensive plays. These vultures aren't just praying for the Indiana Fever to collapse. They are hungry for the return of the status quo. They want the game to go back to being small, predictable, and most importantly, under their control. They see Caitlin's $28 million as an insult to the history they built. They see the sellout crowds as a temporary fever dream, and they are waiting, with sharpened claws, for the moment she stumbles so they can claim they were right all along. But here is what they don't know. What you see on your social media feed is only 10% of the truth. You see the logo threes and the record-breaking jersey sales. You see the sold-out arenas and the television ratings that are currently outperforming the NBA playoffs. But you haven't seen what's happening behind the closed doors of the Beaverton campus. You haven't heard about the shadow clause in the Bueckers deal, the one that suggests Nike might be hedging their bets. And you haven't seen the footage from the private practice sessions where the tension between the new money and the old guard is so thick, it's a wonder. The air conditioning still works. There is a secret brewing in the locker rooms of the league. A quiet realization that while Caitlin Clark owns the present, the brand has already mapped out a pivot. The world thinks this is a story about a girl from Iowa changing the world. It's not. It's a story about a billion-dollar corporation playing a high-stakes game of chess with two of the most gifted athletes to ever touch a basketball. One has the money, the other has the history, and only one can be the face of the Swoosh. The vultures think they know how this ends. They think they can bully Caitlin into submission or wait for the hype to die down. They are wrong, because the war for $28 million is just the beginning, and by the time this season is over, the WNBA will never look the same again. To understand why Nike was willing to bet $28 million on a rookie from Iowa, you have to understand the rot that was eating away at the foundation of the Beaverton campus. For the better part of a decade, Oregon's throne was empty. Nike has always been a company built on the myth of the individual. They don't just sell rubber and leather. They sell the idea that one person can change the world. Michael, LeBron, Kobe. But while the men's side of the house was a factory of gods, the women's basketball division was a ghost town. In the mid-90s, Nike was a pioneer. They gave Sheryl Swoops her own line, the Air Swoops, which ran for 7 silhouettes. They gave Lisa Leslie the Total Air 9. They gave Dawn Staley the Zoom S5. They were aggressive, they were visionary, and then they stopped. Between the mid-2000s and 2023, the signature shoe for women became an endangered species. It wasn't just a lack of funding, it was a lack of imagination. The vultures at the corporate level had convinced themselves that women didn't buy shoes from women. They believed the lie that the only way to sell a basketball sneaker was to put a man's name on it. So, for 15 years, the greatest female athletes on the planet, the MVPs, the champions, the legends were forced to play in player editions of men's shoes. They were wearing the Kobe 5 or the LeBron 20, dressed up in team colors. They were guests in someone else's house. This was the era of the franchise decay. Nike was losing its connection to the pulse of the streets. Their stock was beginning to stagnate. They were playing it safe, over-relying on retro releases of Jordans and Dunks, while upstart brands like Hoka and On began to steal their lunch in the running sector. In the basketball world, the energy was shifting. The NBA was becoming predictable, and the youth were looking for something authentic, something they could claim as their own. Enter the power vacuum. Nike's failure to innovate created a hunger. When Sabrina Ionescu finally broke the drought in 2023 with the Sabrina 1, it wasn't just a success, it was a riot. It was a low-profile, lightning-fast shoe that everyone, men, women, NBA stars, and high school kids wanted to wear. It proved the corporate ghouls wrong. It showed that there was a billion-dollar market sitting right under their noses, waiting for a face to lead it. But Sabrina was just a crack in the dam. Nike knew they needed a flood. They looked at the landscape and saw a terrifying reality. They had let their dominance slip. In the college ranks, the NIL era had turned amateur athletes into mini-corporations overnight. Paige Bueckers was already a Nike athlete at UConn, the purest choice, the media darling with the perfect fundamental game. She was the one they had groomed. She was the heir apparent to the empty throne. She was safe. She was the UConn way. And then, out of the cornfields of Iowa, came a hurricane. Caitlin Clark wasn't part of the plan. She didn't play for a blue blood program. She didn't fit the traditional mold of the Nike superstar. She was loud, she was brash, and she was shooting from the parking lot. More importantly, she was pulling television ratings that were making the NBA's regular season look like local access cable. The decay at Nike had left them desperate. They had an empty throne and two queens fighting for it. One represented the legacy and the structure of the past Paige. The other represented a chaotic, high-scoring future that was currently lighting the stock market on fire. Caitlin, the corporate boardrooms in Oregon became a war room. They realized that if they didn't lock down Caitlin Clark, someone else would. Under Armour was circling with $16 million and the promise of making her the female Steph Curry. Adidas was looking for a way back into the cultural conversation. Nike couldn't just offer her a shoe, they had to offer her the keys to the kingdom. But this created a toxic internal politics that few people realize. By giving Caitlin the $28 million deal and a fast track to a signature line, Nike effectively jumped her in line ahead of the athletes who had been loyal to the brand for years. They sidelined the veterans. They ignored the hierarchy. They chose the Caitlin effect over the Nike way. The throne was no longer empty, but the person sitting on it was an interloper in the eyes of the old guard. The vultures weren't just outside the building. They were inside the meetings. The decision to pick Caitlin over the established stars wasn't just a marketing move. It was a gamble that the old world of women's basketball was dead, and a new, commercial-heavy empire was being born. And in the shadows, Paige Bueckers was watching. The girl who was supposed to be the face of the brand was now the other Nike athlete. The decay had been replaced by a gold rush. But when everyone is digging for the same vein of gold, people get hurt. The franchise was saved, but at what cost to the chemistry of the league and the loyalty of the brand's most faithful soldiers? The $28 million bought Nike a future, but it also bought them a civil war. There is a specific sound that haunts the dreams of every elite athlete. It is not the roar of a crowd or the buzzer at the end of a championship game. It is a dull, sickening pop, a sound so internal, so quiet, that only you can hear it, yet it echoes loud enough to shatter a billion-dollar future. In August of 22, that sound belonged to Paige Bueckers. The injury arc of Paige Bueckers is not just a medical report. It is a 1,500-word tragedy of psychological erosion. To understand the Caitlin effect, you have to understand the void that Paige left behind. For 369 days, the chosen one of women's basketball was a ghost. She wasn't just sidelined. She was forced to watch from a plastic chair in Storrs, Connecticut, as the world moved on without her. This is where the vultures truly began to circle. When Paige suffered that torn anterior cruciate ligament in a pickup game, the narrative shifted overnight. The media, which had spent the previous year crowning her the inevitable face of the sport, suddenly began to speak about her in the past tense. They used words like fragile. They used words like injury-prone. They started to question, if a body built for the surgical elegance of the mid-range could ever survive the high-speed collision course of professional basketball. But the most brutal part of the injury nightmare wasn't the physical pain. It was the identity theft. Imagine being 19 years old and being told you are the greatest thing to happen to your sport in a generation. You are the first freshman to ever win the National Player of the Year. You are the media darling. You have the Nike deals, the magazine covers, and the keys to the most storied program in history. And then, in the blink of an eye, your left knee betrays you. For the second time in less than a year, while Paige was learning how to walk again, while she was spending 6 hours a day in a cold, sterile weight room doing monotonous leg lifts, the Vultures were busy building a new altar. Every time Caitlin Clark hit a shot from 40 feet, every time she broke another record, a piece of Paige's legacy was being reclaimed by the public. The Vultures, the pundits who crave novelty over loyalty, began to frame the rivalry not as a battle between equals, but as a replacement. Is Caitlin Clark the player we thought Paige Bueckers was going to be? That was the headline written in invisible ink across every sports network for 2 years. The psychological toll of that comparison is immeasurable. When you are an elite competitor, your greatest fear isn't losing a game, it's losing your relevance. Paige had to sit in the silence of her own recovery and listen to the world scream a name that wasn't hers. We saw the coach persona on the bench, the smiles, the clipboard, the supportive teammate, but that was the 10%. The other 90% was a nightmare of isolation. Being an injured star is a unique kind of loneliness. You are with the team, but you are not of the team. You travel on the bus, you stay in the hotels, but when the lights go up, you are invisible. You become a spectator of your own life. The Vultures didn't just doubt her health. They doubted her killer instinct. Because Paige's game is built on efficiency and unselfishness, the critics began to claim that she lacked the alpha mentality required to compete with the sheer, unadulterated volume of Caitlin's scoring. They said she was too passive. They said she was soft. They took her injuries as a sign of mental weakness, as if a ligament tear was a choice. And then there was the fear, the kinesiophobia that no one talks about. Every time Paige finally stepped back on a court, the world wasn't looking at her jump shot. They were looking at her landing. They were waiting for the knee to buckle. They were waiting for the pop. Every hard foul from a rival, every stumble in the paint, felt like a potential career-ending catastrophe. This is the psychological erosion of the injury arc. It turns a fearless prodigy into a calculated survivor. While Caitlin Clark was playing with house money, healthy, confident, and emboldened by a green light that never turned red, Paige Bueckers was playing a game of chess against her own anatomy. By the time Paige was fully cleared, the landscape had been terraformed. The $28 million Nike deal was on someone else's desk. The face of the league crown had been moved to Indiana. The Vultures had finished their meal and were looking for the next thing to tear apart. But what the Vultures missed was the hardening of the soul. You don't spend 369 days in the dark without learning how to see in it. The injury nightmare didn't break Paige Bueckers. It stripped away the media darling veneer and replaced it with a cold, calculated hunger. The world thinks the redemption arc is about the knee getting stronger. It's not. It's about the mind getting meaner. The basketball marriage between Caitlin and the fans was built on joy. The return of Paige Bueckers is being built on something much more dangerous, the memory of what was taken from her while she was down. The nightmare is over, but the Vultures are still circling, and this time, Paige has a clear view of exactly who they are. The $28 million contract wasn't paid out for sportsmanship, it was paid out for ballistics. While the Vultures were busy debating her personality, Caitlin Clark was busy mastering the physics of the impossible. To understand the redemption of the Indiana Fever and the skyrocketing valuation of the Nike deal, you have to look past the box score and into the mechanical overhaul that turned a high-volume college shooter into a professional weapon of mass destruction. In the transition from Iowa to the pros, the critics the old guard claimed her range wouldn't translate. They said the professional line was deeper, the defenders were faster, and the physicality would break her rhythm. They were wrong because they treated her shooting as a skill. In reality, it is a mathematical certainty. The logo 3 is not a gimmick. It is a structural necessity. When Caitlin launches a shot from 35 feet, she is not just hunting for 3 points. She is manipulating the geometry of the entire court. This is what scouts call gravity. By threatening to score the moment she crosses half court, she forces the defense to expand. She creates a vacuum in the paint that allows her teammates to operate in a world of open space. The mechanics behind this are a marvel of kinetic energy. Most shooters rely on their upper body as they get further from the rim, which leads to a pushing motion that ruins accuracy. Caitlin's mechanical overhaul involved a masterclass in lower body synchronization. Every shot begins in her ankles. The energy transfers through her knees. The very joints the vultures hope would fail, and travels in a single, fluid, one-motion release. By releasing the ball on the way up, she uses the momentum of her entire body to generate the force needed for deep range, keeping her wrist flick identical, whether she is at the free throw line or the logo. But the real transformation wasn't just in her hands, it was in her eyes. The vision of Caitlin Clark is the secret engine of the Nike brand. We are talking about a processing speed that rivals elite NBA point guards. While a standard player sees a defender, Caitlin sees a passing lane that hasn't opened yet. She is playing 3 seconds into the future. This is the redemption the media missed. They thought she would have to slow down for the WNBA. Instead, she forced the WNBA to speed up her level. Analyze the body language in those early Indiana Fever games. In the beginning, there was a lag. Caitlin would throw a bullet pass into a window that her teammates didn't even know existed, and the ball would fly out of bounds. The vultures screamed turnovers. The old guard laughed. But those weren't failures of skill. They were failures of synchronization. The mechanical overhaul required her to recalibrate her teammates. She had to teach them how to see the game through her lens. She stopped playing safe. She doubled down on the home run pass. She forced the franchise to abandon the slow, grinded-out pace of the previous decade and embrace a high-octane, transition-heavy offense that mirrored the modern NBA. This is where the money meets the metal. Nike didn't just buy a shooter, they bought a system. The redemption arc of Chapter 4 is about the moment the Indiana Fever stopped trying to fix Caitlin Clark and started building a cathedral around her. The speed increased, the vision became contagious, and suddenly, those 35-foot heaves weren't bad shots anymore. They were the most efficient plays in basketball. The vultures who prayed for her collapse had to watch as her shooting percentage climbed and her assist numbers broke league records. They realized that you can't bully someone who can score before you're even close enough to touch them. The physics of the Logo 3 rendered their hostility obsolete. Caitlin Clark didn't just overhaul her game. She overhauled the league's expectations of what a woman on a basketball court can do. She proved that with the right mechanics, the floor has no ceiling. And as the ball splashed through the net from the center court logo, the sound wasn't just a swish. It was a sound of $28 million being validated in real time. In the high-stakes theater of professional sports, there are no accidental alliances. There are only collisions that either result in a wreck or a masterpiece. For the Indiana Fever, the arrival of Caitlin Clark wasn't just a draft pick. It was a forced entry into the life of Kelsey Mitchell. This is the basketball marriage. And like any marriage worth its salt, the first few months were a psychological war of attrition. Kelsey Mitchell is not a supporting character in the Caitlin Clark story. She is a foundational pillar of the league, a woman who spent 7 long, grueling seasons in the trenches of Indiana, scoring thousands of points in relative obscurity while the franchise decayed around her. She was the one who stayed when everyone else left. She was the one who carried the scoring load, while the vultures mocked the Fever as a lottery factory. Then, overnight, the $28 million rookie arrives. The cameras move, the microphones shift, the marketing budget is liquidated and reinvested into a single jersey number. For a veteran of Mitchell's caliber, that isn't just a change in roster, it's an ego-shattering earthquake. But look at the micro-analysis of their body language. If you watch the tape from May, there is a visible distance. They are 2 alphas sharing a single ball. You see the scouts tell Mitchell standing in the corner, her hands down, watching Caitlin launch 30-footers. You see the frustrated flick of the wrist when a pass doesn't arrive. This was the moment the vultures were waiting for. They wanted a locker room schism. They wanted the veteran to resent the rookie. They wanted the marriage to end in a public, messy divorce that would prove the Caitlin effect was toxic. Instead, they witnessed a tactical evolution that changed the history of the franchise. The turning point wasn't a meeting. It was a realization of complementary speed. Kelsey Mitchell is arguably the fastest player in the WNBA, from baseline to baseline. Caitlin Clark has the fastest release and vision in the game. When they stopped competing for the spotlight and started leveraging their specific brands of chaos, the league's defense collapsed. Analyze the lead pass chemistry. In June, the pattern shifted. Caitlin began to use her gravity to pull two defenders toward the logo. Mitchell, recognizing the vacuum, stopped waiting for the ball and started sprinting. The result was a series of full-court touchdown passes that made the favorite look like the Showtime Lakers. This is the psychological depth of the duo. Mitchell provided the veteran stabilizer that Caitlin desperately needed to survive the hostility of the old guard. When a rival defender tried to bully the rookie, it was Kelsey who stepped in. When the pressure of the $28 million contract became a suffocating weight, it was Kelsey who took the ball and said, "I'll handle this for 5 minutes. Go breathe." We call it a marriage because it required the ultimate sacrifice, the sacrifice of the primary identity. Kelsey Mitchell had to accept that she would no longer be the face of the team, while Caitlin Clark had to accept that she could not win without Mitchell's lightning-quick scoring. The numbers tell the story, but the chemistry scout sees the truth in the bench interactions. Watch the way they celebrate now. It's no longer polite. It's primal. It's the high five of two people who realize they aren't just teammates. They are a two-headed monster that the rest of the league is terrified to face. This basketball marriage didn't just save the Indiana Fever. It redefined the trajectory of the WNBA. It proved that the new money could coexist with the old soul of the game. It silenced the vultures who claimed that Caitlin's style was unselfish or ball-dominant. In Kelsey Mitchell, Caitlin found the perfect partner to translate her vision into reality. The Fever went from a franchise in decay to a dynasty in waiting, not because of a single star, but because of a partnership that refused to break under the weight of a billion-dollar expectation. The marriage is solid, and for the rest of the league, that is the most terrifying news of all. In the high-stakes ecosystem of the WNBA, respect is not given, it is extracted. But for Caitlin Clark, the tax for entry wasn't just physical. It was a coordinated, psychological vulture attack from the old guard. If you want to understand the true cost of that $28 million contract, you have to look at the moments the broadcast cameras tried to sanitize. We are talking about the Jeep protocol, jealousy, envy, egos, and pettiness. This wasn't just rookie hazing. This was a hostile response to a commercial takeover. The Vultures began their descent before Caitlin even played a single professional minute. It started with the legends. When Diana Taurasi sat on national television and uttered the infamous words, "Reality is coming," she wasn't just giving a veteran warning. She was drawing a line in the sand. To the old guard, Caitlin Clark was a golden goose who hadn't paid her dues in the empty gyms and charterless travel days of the previous decade. They saw the private jets, the sold-out arenas, and the Nike millions, and they didn't see a savior. They saw an interloper. But the reality that arrived was far more violent than a press conference quote. Analyze the body language of the Kennedy Carter incident. On June 1st, 2024, the world saw what happens when resentment boils over into a physical strike. A blindside hip check before an inbound pass. It wasn't a basketball play, it was a message. And look at the bench, look at the reaction of the rival players. There was no remorse. There was a celebration. The Vultures were cheering for the disruption of the golden child. They wanted to see if the girl who shot from the logo could handle the smoke of a league that was built on grit and survival. This is the psychological warfare of the old guard. They used the physicality narrative as a front for a much deeper resentment. The media pundits like Stephen A. Smith called it out for what it was. A league that was fumbling its own growth because the incumbents were too busy protecting their territory. The veterans were being asked to be grateful for the Caitlin effect, but imagine the bitterness of being a three-time champion like A'ja Wilson and seeing a rookie get a signature shoe before you. Imagine being told that your entire career's worth of work only matters now because a white girl from Iowa decided to show up. The racial and cultural undertones of this vulture attack are the parts of the truth that only make up 10% of the social media conversation. Behind the scenes, the tension was a powder keg. Every hard foul was amplified by a fan base that was new to the league and protective of their star. Every response from a veteran was scrutinized as hatred. But look closer at the micro-analysis of the games. You see the ice-out tactics the way defenders would pick Caitlin up full court, not just to stop her but to exhaust her, to break her spirit, to prove she didn't belong. You see the veterans refusing to acknowledge her after the buzzer. This was a lockout, a collective attempt to maintain the hierarchy. The Vultures were praying for a collapse because a Caitlin Clark failure would validate their struggle. If she failed, it meant the league didn't need saving. It meant the old way was the only way. But here is where the takeover became truly hostile. Caitlin Clark didn't back down. She didn't complain to the refs. She didn't play the victim. She absorbed the hits. She wiped the blood off her jersey, and she kept shooting from the logo. By refusing to break, she effectively retired the old guard's leverage. When Diana Taurasi eventually had to sit on a stage and joke that reality is coming for me now, it was the ultimate white flag. The takeover was complete. The $28 million rookie had survived the most concentrated Vulture attack in sports history. She didn't just join the league, she conquered the people who tried to keep her out. The hierarchy was shattered, and the old guard was left to realize that in the new WNBA, the reality is that the game no longer belongs to them. While the world was busy worshiping at the altar of the $28 million contract, a ghost was haunting the hallways of Beaverton. This is the Paige paradox. If Caitlin Clark is the storm that reshaped the coastline, Paige Bueckers is the deep current that Nike has been tracking for years. To the casual fan, the hierarchy is simple. Caitlin is the number one, the record breaker, the face of the brand. But inside the scouting departments and the marketing war rooms, the conversation is far more nuanced. There is a Yukon ghost in the machine, a belief that while Caitlin owns the box office, Paige might just own the game. The paradox began the moment Nike announced Paige as the first collegiate athlete to ever design her own player edition shoe, the GT Hustle 3. Think about the timing. This wasn't a standard endorsement. It was a historic precedent. While Caitlin was breaking the scoring record in Iowa, Nike was giving Paige the keys to the design studio. This is the mystery the Vultures missed. Nike didn't just want Paige as an influencer, they wanted her as an architect. The scouts tell lies in the efficiency. If you analyze the film with the eyes of a professional strategist, the contrast is jarring. Caitlin is high risk, high reward. She is the volume shooter who will give you 30 points and 10 turnovers, living and dying by the sword of the logo 3. Paige is the point guard of the purists. She is the athlete who will give you 25 points on 80% shooting without ever looking like she's breaking a sweat. Nike's internal scouts saw this and realized they had a marketing dilemma. Do you bet on the home run hitter who brings in the ratings or the surgical operator who never makes a mistake? The Yukon Ghost represents the establishment. Paige is the product of Gino Auriemma's finishing school, a system designed to produce pro-ready killers. She doesn't just play basketball, she solves it. While Caitlin was forced to be the entire system in Iowa, Paige was taught how to be the perfect component of a championship machine. This creates a higher floor that fascinates the corporate side of Nike. They know that even on her worst night, Paige Bueckers is the most efficient person on the floor. But here is the 10% of the truth that social media won't tell you. There is a cold war within the brand's marketing department. One camp, the Disruptors, wants to pour every cent into the Caitlin Clark From Anywhere campaign. They want the loud, brash, 35-foot heaves that go viral on TikTok. The other camp, the Traditionalists, is quietly building the Paige Bueckers empire. They are focusing on authenticity and social ROI. They are banking on the fact that Paige, with her 3.6 million TikTok followers and her deep connection to the unrivaled 3-on-3 league, has a tighter grip on the Gen Z demographic than the mass market appeal of Caitlin. The paradox deepened in 2025. While Caitlin was surviving the Vulture attack in Indiana, Paige was quietly putting up a rookie season in Dallas that, by the numbers, was actually more efficient. She broke the record for the fastest rookie to 500 points and 100 assists. She scored 44 points in a single game, the most by a rookie in history. And yet, the $28 million spotlight remained fixed on Indiana. This is the psychological toll of being the other Nike athlete. Paige has to walk into every arena wearing the swoosh, knowing that her brand is being used as a safe alternative to the Caitlin Clark phenomenon. She is the ghost in the machine, the reminder that before there was a Caitlin effect, there was a Paige promise. Nike is playing a double game. They have hedged their bets by giving Caitlin the signature shoe and Paige the history-making player edition design rights. They have ensured that no matter who wins the 2026 to 2028 Dynasty War, the house always wins. But for Paige Bueckers, being a safe bet isn't enough. The girl who was supposed to be the chosen one is now the underdog in her own brand. The Yukon Ghost is no longer content to haunt the sidelines. As she enters the next phase of her career, the paradox is shifting. The world thinks it's watching the Caitlin Clark show. Nike knows it's actually waiting to see if the Ghost can finally reclaim the throne. In the cold, calculating world of sports finance, numbers are the only thing that cannot be intimidated by a hard foul or a veteran's glare. And the numbers attached to Caitlin Clark are not just records. They're a hostile takeover of the WNBA's entire economic structure. This is the chapter the vultures hate most. Because you can argue about shooting percentages, but you cannot argue with $1 billion. To understand the scale of the hostile takeover, you have to look at the before times. In 2023, the Indiana Fever were a franchise drifting in the dark, averaging just 4,000 fans a game. They were a tax write-off in a league that was struggling to prove its own valuation. Then came the Caitlin effect. By the midpoint of 2025, the Fever weren't just a basketball team. They were a blue-chip stock. Average attendance plummeted upward, rising by 318% to over 17,000 fans per game. For the first time in history, a WNBA team was outdrawing its NBA counterpart, the Indiana Pacers, in their own building. But the real bloodbath happened in the merchandise sector. Within 1 hour of the draft, Caitlin Clark's number 22 jersey was sold out nationwide. By the end of the year, she hadn't just broken WNBA sales records. She was the number 2 best-selling basketball player in the entire world, trailing only Stephen Curry. She was outselling LeBron James. She was outselling Kevin Durant. In the world of sports collectibles, her rookie cards were being graded at a rate higher than LeBron and Curry combined, second only to Michael Jordan himself. This is the economic hostile takeover. It's the moment the league realized that the power had shifted from the front offices to a single 23-year-old's brand. Analyze the hierarchy shift in the boardroom. For years, the WNBA's valuation was a topic of polite debate. After Caitlin, analysts at Indiana University determined she was responsible for over 25% of the entire league's economic activity. She didn't just bring in fans. She increased the estimated value of the WNBA to over $1 billion. When Forbes released their 2025 list of the most valuable franchises, the Indiana Fever, a team that was a basement dweller 2 years ago, was ranked second in the league with a value of $370 million. This financial explosion is exactly why the old guard felt the need to attack. Imagine being a veteran who has spent 15 years building a league, only to see a rookie walk in and increase the revenue by $32 million in a single season. The hostility we saw on the court wasn't just about basketball. It was about the terrifying realization that the old guard was no longer the primary stakeholder in their own sport. The investors, the networks, and Nike were no longer asking the veterans for permission. They were following the money. And then there is the Paige Bueckers factor. While Caitlin was executing this takeover in Indiana, Paige was entering the league in Dallas, already a brand mogul with the highest NIL earnings in college history. The vultures were hoping for a split in the market, a way to dilute the Caitlin effect. But the data showed the opposite. The rivalry didn't divide the pie, it grew it. The $28 million Nike deal for Caitlin and the historic design rights for Paige were two sides of the same coin. Nike wasn't choosing between them. They were buying the entire board. The hostile takeover is now complete. The WNBA is no longer a charity. It is a profit center. The Caitlin effect has forced a total renegotiation of the league's collective bargaining agreement, with players finally demanding a share of the billion-dollar pie they used to only dream of. The vultures can keep circling, and the legends can keep talking about reality, but the new reality is written in the ledgers. The hierarchy has been liquidated. The new money has arrived, and it didn't come to play, it came to own. $28 million was never the ceiling. It was the basement. As we look toward the horizon of 2026 through 2028, we are no longer talking about a single player's contract. We are talking about the construction of the first true commercial dynasty in the history of women's sports. The legacy of Caitlin Clark and the Indiana Fever is being etched into a landscape that is currently undergoing a seismic billion-dollar terraforming. This is the era of the 3-year plan. The vultures will tell you that the hype has a half-life. They are waiting for the new car smell to wear off. But they are ignoring the cold, hard expansion math. In 2026, the WNBA is not just growing, it is mutating. With the arrival of the Portland Fire and the Toronto Tempo, the league is expanding its footprint into international waters and West Coast strongholds. For Caitlin Clark, this means the Caitlin effect is no longer confined to the Midwest. It becomes a global export. But a dynasty is not built on ticket sales alone. It is built on the basketball marriage we analyze in Chapter 5, now evolving into a triad of power. Analyze the projected roster continuity, with Aliyah Boston anchoring the paint and Kelsey Mitchell providing the veteran lightning. The Fever have created a structural triple threat that mirrors the early days of the Golden State Warriors. The legacy narrative for 2026 isn't just about Caitlin winning an MVP. It's about the Fever becoming the first team to leverage the new $2.2 billion media deal to build a super team. The shadow of 2025 still looms. However, the injury arc we discussed in Chapter 3 didn't just happen to Paige Bueckers. In the summer of 2025, the world stopped when Caitlin Clark herself was sidelined by a significant injury that limited her sophomore campaign to only 13 games. The Vultures had their moment of triumph. They claimed the Fever was breaking. They said the physical toll of the old guard's hostile takeover had finally caught up to her. But 2026 is the year of the great return. The legacy of 2026 to 2028 will be defined by the signature shoe war. This is where the Nike strategy enters its endgame. Spring of 2026 is the scheduled launch of Caitlin's first official signature sneaker. At the same time, Paige Bueckers, now the face of the Dallas Wings, will be releasing her own buckets line. We are moving from player versus player to brand versus brand. The dynasty isn't just about who wins the ring. It's about whose logo is on the feet of every kid on a playground in Toronto, Portland, and Cleveland. And then there is the USA Next Chapter. Look at the training camp rosters for the 2026 FIBA World Cup. For the first time, Caitlin and Paige are no longer rivals on opposite sides of a collegiate divide. They are being groomed as the dual engines of the American gold medal machine. This is where the vulture narrative dies. You cannot claim a player is a flash in the pan when they are leading the national team into a new era of global dominance. By 2028, when the league expands again into Cleveland, the Indiana Fever won't just be a team. They will be a global corporate entity. The legacy of Caitlin Clark will be measured in the revenue share targets of the new collective bargaining agreement, the moment when the players finally claim the hundreds of millions of dollars they have been generating. The dynasty is being built on the bones of the old guard's resistance. It is being funded by $28 million of Oregon-based ambition. And as we move toward the final verdict, the question is no longer whether Caitlin Clark changed the game. The question is whether anyone will be able to keep up with the world she created. $28 million is a lot of money to pay for a shoe, but Nike isn't buying a shoe. They are buying the narrative of the next century. This is the final verdict. As we sit here at the end of 2025, the dust is finally settling on a year that redefined the economic limits of women's sports. The vultures are still circling, but their cries are getting quieter, drowned out by the sound of sold-out arenas in Dallas and Indiana. For the first time, we have the data to answer the polarizing question that has divided locker rooms and corporate boardrooms for years. Who actually owns the swoosh? On one side of the ledger, you have the absolute gravity of Caitlin Clark. Even with an injury that limited her sophomore season to 13 games, she remained the primary engine of the league's economy. Her $12 million off-court valuation and the official unveiling of the interlocking CC logo in August of 2025 proved that Nike is all in on her as the definitive global icon. They aren't just selling her to basketball fans. They are selling her in star-studded Christmas commercials alongside the Kels brothers and Travis Scott. She is a mass-market queen, the athlete who made the WNBA mandatory viewing for people who didn't know the difference between a zone defense and a fast break. On the other side, you have the surgical precision of Paige Bueckers. The Paige paradox we discussed in Chapter 7 has become a reality. By winning the 2025 Rookie of the Year award and dropping a record-tying 44 points on 80% shooting, Paige proved that the Yukon Ghost is a superior on-court technician. With a net worth already climbing toward $9 million and a rookie season that statistically outpaced Caitlin's in efficiency, Paige has become the purest choice. She is the athlete for those who value the how as much as the how many. But here's the 10% of the truth that the commercials won't tell you. Nike hasn't chosen a winner. They have built a monopoly by funding Caitlin's $28 million takeover and simultaneously giving Paige the design rights to the GT Hustle line. Nike has ensured that the rivalry is the product. They don't want a winner. They want a war. They want you to argue in the comments about whether Caitlin's range is better than Paige's efficiency. They want you to buy the CC signature shoe in 2026 and the Buckets line in 2027. The hostile takeover is over, but the structural war is just beginning. As the league moves toward the 2026 collective bargaining agreement, the players are no longer asking for scraps. They are looking at the $2.2 billion media deal and the $10 million bank accounts of their youngest stars, and they are demanding a new world order. The vultures think the Caitlin effect is a bubble. They think the Paige promise is just hype. But you've seen the numbers. You've seen the mechanics. You've seen the $28 million receipt. So, I leave you with the final verdict. If you had to build a dynasty for the next 10 years, and you only had one contract to give, do you bet on the girl who can score from the logo or the girl who never misses from the elbow? Do you choose the 19,000 fans in Indiana or the surgical 44 points in Dallas? Is Nike betting on the best player or simply the loudest one? The comment section is open. Pick a side. Because in this war, there is no room for the middle ground.